Heather, thank you so much for coming. So Dr. Heather Richardson, you work at, you're one of the joint CEOs at St Christopher's Hospice in London. You've previously held the role of National Clinical Lead for Hospice UK and worked as Clinical Director and then Strategy Advisor to St Joseph's Hospice in East London prior to your move to St Christopher's. Heather has also worked as an associate with the Innovation Unit based in London. She is a registered general and mental health nurse and has worked in hospice and palliative care since 1988. She has a PhD and her research was concerned with users' experience of the day hospice. More recently, she's developed a research interest around public health and end-of-life care. She currently serves as an honorary professor in palliative care at Lancaster University. And in the past, she has received the International Palliative Nurse of the Year Award issued by the International Journal of Palliative Nursing and other awards related to her role in innovation in healthcare. I hope that's correct, Heather.
Great, thank you very much.
No, thank you so much. So over to Heather, whose title is Changing Times, Challenge or Opportunity. Thank you, Heather.
Lovely, thank you. I'm just gonna, can I just have an indication that you can see what I can see, that there is a slide up, is there?
There is a slide up. I don't know if you can maximize it.
Hold on one moment. Better?
Better, yeah, thank you.
Lovely.
That's perfect.
Great. I'm going to try and move between my slides and the internet, so it may be a bit challenging, but let's see how we get on. So thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to participate in your conference this afternoon. And I was so delighted to hear that your conference was going ahead. It seems to me that this time, like no other, is an opportunity. It requires an opportunity to get together, to reflect, to think really carefully about the future, and thinking about issues that are around spiritual care, well-being, existential considerations. All of that feels so timely. So it was a pleasure to hear that you were going ahead, and really I was really delighted to be asked to contribute. I know I've got colleagues in the audience, Andrew and Mike. I'm preparing myself to hear what you think, but we've had an extraordinary time at St Christopher's in the last year, and I'm going to reflect quite a lot on that. And my sense at the end of 15 months of lockdown, not lockdown, lockdown again, is that there have been huge challenges, but there have been real opportunities as well. And so I want to look back on the last 15 months with you and think about where are we now, and what have we witnessed during the course of the pandemic that can really help us think about the future of your roles, of mine, of hospices, and our shared responsibilities around shaping end of life in the future. I want us to go slightly back slightly further than the pandemic. I'm going to try and link in to some of Cicely Saunders' work as well, and then make some propositions about how we build on all of that going forward. And I'm going to start by thinking about the different hats that we're all wearing today and what a good ending looks like. And I have included this quote from Kent Haraf. I actually don't know enough about this person. I've read a couple of their books. I think he was the son of a Methodist minister, but Andrew might be able to help me with that. But I love this quote. Who would have thought at this time in our lives that we'd still have something like this? That it turns out we're not finished with changes and excitements, and not all dried up in body and spirit. And I think before the pandemic, hospice care had got pretty stale, and it was pretty stuck in many respects. And we may want to talk a little bit more about that. And actually, whilst the last year has been hugely challenging, what it has made us realise at St Christopher's is We have a role in the health system that we perhaps hadn't really realized or maximized. We have an opportunity to work differently with our communities that we'd either not seen or not really mined significantly, and that we had resources internally that we had disregarded, but when we really needed it, it all came up trumps. So let's start with the different roles and relationships that we have around end of life. And the first thing I want to say is that you, like me, are so much more than your job title. And when I'm thinking about end of life now, I have to look at very different parts of myself to work out in a very positive and optimistic way what leverage I have, what experiences I have, what opportunities I have to create a world that's going to look very different post-pandemic. So there's me at home and in my local community. There is me, a professional in my organization, for me here at St. Christopher's. There's me, a player in the broader health, social care and death systems. And there's me as a member of broader society, the citizen that I am, as well as the professional, the wife, the mother, the neighbor, and so on. And you will have a whole variety of hats that you wear, relationships that you have, and positions that you hold. And I would say to you today, when we think about opportunities and challenges post-pandemic, don't only think about your official role in your organization or your church or whatever it is. Think wider, because our leverage is so much more when you position yourself differently. So I want you just to spend a few moments now thinking about the notion of a good death. And I'd like you to spend a few moments thinking about the best death that you've seen. Now, that might be in real life, it might be in films, on TV, or in paintings. And it would be interesting for me to know something about the elements that made it so good. What inputs made the difference? The likelihood is that you will have seen or known of good and bad deaths. So when you saw the very best deaths, or witnessed or heard about the best deaths, what about them made the difference? And then who benefited from those very positive attributes of a good death? So I am going to see if I can find my chat box. Oh, I don't think I can use chat box because we're on a webinar, aren't we? So I'll have to believe that. Sorry,
we're in Zoom. I think you can use a chat.
Okay,
So maybe Mike can say if you can't while you're screen sharing. I don't know, Mike, can you?
While screen sharing, but I think certainly the rest of us can use chat.
Okay, well, perhaps would you mind putting in some of your comments in answer to those questions, please? I'd really appreciate that. Thank you. Oh, yeah.
Can you see that, Heather?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much. I'm now waiting for a tsunami of comments from the audience. Thank you, Julia, for kicking us off. Yep, family present, dying person prepared, absolutely. Yes, Carol, you and I are on the same page, wine and laughter. Great. Yeah, lovely. Thank you so much. There are some really strong themes in here. not necessarily always about being at home, but being about somewhere where people felt comfortable in their surroundings, their work was done effectively, and they had people around them for whom they cared. And I really, I love this painting. I saw it in the Wellcome Foundation. It's George Washington on his deathbed in 1799. He died very suddenly. He just started to bleed. He was a young man, and he died within 24 hours of becoming unwell. But in that 24 hours, in fact, in the last few hours before his death, he's at home. He's surrounded by the people that really care about him. He arranges to make sure that his will is sorted. And then shortly before he dies, according to the story, he says, "All is well." And for me, it's a depiction of perhaps the very best ending that you can have, albeit him far too young to have died. So let's have a look at what a good ending looks like in the literature. And this has got to be one of the most clinical depictions of a good death. It's the Institute of Medicine. Perhaps it's not surprising, but it's around being free from avoidable distress and suffering, in general accord with the patient's and family wishes, and consistent with clinical, cultural and ethical standards. And
Heather,
I do...
Can you, sorry, have you got a chat box in the middle of your screen? Can you just
Thank you.
Gone.
Lovely, is that gone now? Thank you very
Yep.
much, Keith. I think what's really important, even in this very clinical definition, is that, and one of you said it in the chat box, is actually you can't enjoy the better things in life, like relationships, if you're in profound discomfort. And all of us will have seen that in our practice. This is a more interesting piece of work. It was done in 2017. It's a meta-analysis done by some geriatricians. And interestingly, it's in order of importance. Having control is deemed to be the most important consideration on the part of patients or people who are coming to the end of their life. Being pain-free is important, experiencing emotional well-being, and interestingly, engagement with religion and spirituality. That won't be any surprise to you, but it would be to a lot of your colleagues. But what's interesting is that what a good death is depends on who you are. So there was some work done a long while ago, 2007, who looked at what patients want. And in essence, they wanted quick, painless, sudden and peaceful deaths, whereas professionals focused much more on the sort of experience of dying, life closure and death presentation. And if we look at Cicely Saunders, she was one of the, perhaps one of the greatest things that she brought to our thinking about end of life was its very multi-faceted element. And that will be of no surprise to you. But I think in today's time, when we talk about recovery from COVID, it's very easy to disregard or to minimize some of the social and spiritual impact of the way that people have died or are grieving at the moment. Because physically, we don't perceive that there was too much of a problem or people died very quickly. And of course, that's not the reality. Cicely Saunders, when she was asked about the kind of death that she would like, she said she didn't want to die quickly. She wanted time to prepare, and she wanted to get to a point where she could say, well, I'm me and it's all right. And she spoke about something that I think is really interesting. She talked about freedom of the spirit being one of the principles of hospice. Now, I'm going to just try now just to play a little tiny bit of her talking on Desert Island Discs when she speaks about this. So bear with me and let's see if I can do this. You'll hear a tiny bit of Haydn's creation before she speaks, If All Is Well.
the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra and Chorus, and The Heavens Are Telling the Glory of God from Haydn's Creation. What about, may I ask you, about your own death? I know that most of us, I'm sure, would want death to be as speedy and as painless as possible. But I understand that wouldn't be your choice at all.
I would like to have time. I think one needs time to say thank you. One needs time to say I'm sorry. And one needs time to sort out something of yourself and what really matters until perhaps you can finally reach the place where, as it were, you can say, well, I'm me and it's all right. And of course, I would be facing death as a Christian with the belief that I won't travel that journey alone. And although it is into mystery, it is a mystery of love. But we wouldn't ever want to impose that feeling upon our own patients unless they came forward and asked for us. When David died, I had the strong, strong feeling that he'd come in his own way to the right place for him, and that freedom of the spirit was another of the things that he left us as the principles of hospice.
Last record.
Are you still all with me?
Oh, yes.
Great, lovely. And I think what's interesting is that time was something that was denied many people who have died of COVID in the last year, and the kind of opportunities that Cicely spoke about weren't ones that people who died very quickly, died unexpectedly, were able to have. And so I think that's an important backdrop to today's talk. So where are we now? I think things are pretty tough for many people. And we have seen suffering, huge suffering on the part of people who died of COVID or who are living with long COVID, those who are left behind, and those who seek to care for them. And I'm not just thinking about families and informal carers, I'm thinking about our colleagues, and particularly people that were thrown into the business of end-of-life care when that isn't their normal area of practice. And many individual practitioners feel pretty tired at the end of the last 15 months. And I think organizations and their leaders are frayed too. And the future feels very uncertain. People want to be able to plan holidays. They want to think that we're opening up and so on and so on. But there is very little certainty in that regard. And for many people, there's an aspiration to go back to life as it was. And yet I want to say so much of the last year has been transformational and must be built upon. And so going back to what we had before, whilst it's tempting and comfortable, a bit like staying in a relationship that you know is not fantastic, but it's kind of, it's what you know. I think actually one of the things I want to say to you is, let's try and stay a bit longer in this liminal space, in this slightly uncomfortable space, and reflect on everything that has changed and the innovation that's happened. I love this cartoon. It says, who led the digital transformation of your company? You know, was it the CEO? Was it the CEO? No, it was COVID-19. And for us at St. Christopher's, we have seen transformation, not just around technology, but around the way that we work, the development of our model, the kind of democratization of knowledge through a new centre. All that has happened because of COVID. And I think really positively, palliative care has got a profile now, locally and nationally, that's been lost or absent for a while. And more generally in society, people are mindful of their mortality and those around them. Now, for some, that's a huge anxiety, but it exists regardless of COVID. And what we have to work with and help people to manage is how you live in this liminal space between life and death. For some, it's closer than for others. I think there's recognition across the board, and I mean by government, by the NHS, a whole variety of people now, that suffering in relation to end of life is much more than physical symptoms. And I've seen some really restorative stuff where government acknowledges, for example, that looking after people's safety in care homes at the cost of allowing them to have visitors in the form of their family perhaps was the wrong decision, because that pain of loneliness is probably much worse or was never negotiated at the cost of perhaps a vulnerability to getting the virus. There's a real desire for some redress, particularly around suffering, and many people have contributed for the first time to this particular aspect of societal life. And I've been so encouraged by some of the mutual aid groups that have grown, some of the grassroots community initiatives to remember people who have died, and so on. And interestingly, some elements of religious life have absolutely thrived despite the limitations of closed churches and so on. And I wouldn't dream of talking to you about that. But I'm married to an Anglican priest, and I think the community of our church is stronger now than it certainly was 18 months ago. There's been some real shifts in that community that we would have never seen prior to COVID. So we have a real opportunity to build on the best and reflect on the rest. And I think there is something about not taking for granted this new space and really giving thought, which I'm going to do in the next 25 minutes, to what we must repair, preserve, and actually say goodbye to. So there are some things that we should never allow back into our organization's life, our way of working, our practice. There is some stuff that we need to rekindle, and there is some stuff definitely to be built upon. One of the most important messages of today is the time is now. And I think that if we wait even 3 months or 6 months, people will have returned to a place of comfort. They will start immediately returning to practices that they think were fine 18 months ago. They were certainly more comfortable. And in my own organization, for example, we moved away from seeing everybody to doing virtual consultations, for example, for people at home. We've seen many more people in the last year than we have ever seen in our organization as patients. But the desire in the organization is to go back to face-to-face consultations. Now, for some people that will be right, but actually let's not make sure that we just slide back to doing face-to-face for everybody at the cost of reaching more people and reaching people who previously were marginalized or excluded. So COVID's been a catalyst for change and innovation, and we need to take up advantage of the opportunities it presents right now. And I was part of a very interesting piece of work last year with Nesta and with Marie Curie, when we were looking at the opportunities for change and innovation as a result of COVID. And there were 5 key themes that emerged through our work. We did quite a lot of analysis ourselves, looked at the literature and so on. But we also had 2 very large events, excuse me, where we were consulting with a whole variety of people, not just in the health system, but in the death system as well, to find out what they thought the opportunities for the future were. And what's really interesting is that people saw opportunity both in the accelerants for innovation that existed, but actually an opportunity to look and address the cracks in the current system that had been amplified through the crisis. So the first theme is around equitable, person-centered and holistic support. And of course, I don't need to tell you that one size does not fit all. That is one of your key messages to all of us in your work. But I think that we have seen during COVID, and it's been reiterated in people's stories of either good or bad death, that nobody is the same, and acknowledging the breadth and complexity of the person that stands in front of you is one of the most important things that we need to embed in practice going forward. And I think the people who died worst in the last year were people for whom we could only see their needs rather than their goals or their aspirations. In some ways, that very reductive response was inevitable, but we moved very much to thinking about people who needed oxygen, who needed admission to hospital, who needed antibiotics or steroids or whatever their treatment was, rather than thinking about actually whether they ought to be in hospital at all, or if they were in hospital, whether they needed to be going home or to a care home to reflect the priority, for example, that they would give to being with people that they knew and loved. I think one of the most exciting things that I've noticed in our practice at St. Christopher's in the last year is that we've moved much more to recognizing people's strengths and resilience, as well as what they can't do in their illness. And I think one of the very the dark sides of advancements in clinical practice is that we've become very focused on the degree to which people are dependent, or how much movement they have, or how much pain they have, rather than looking at their assets. And this isn't just about patients, it's about families and carers, the communities from which people come. But recognizing people's strengths and their resilience is one way of enabling people to carry on living well. And encouraging them to plan for their future, however long or short of that, I think is part of the optimism and the control that people really seek from us. One of the most interesting things about COVID is that we were forced as an organisation to share risks with patients and families in a way that we never had done before. So at the height of COVID-1, we had huge numbers of people seeking our help in the community. We literally didn't have enough person power to respond. And so we were in a place where we had to see whether families were prepared to do more of the administration of medications to ensure that somebody was pain-free and comfortable at home. It did involve sharing risk. We had to teach people how to assess pain and then give medication, whether they did that with telephone guidance or not, varied from family to family. But actually, families really wanted to do it. And we had families coming to see us and say, look, I'm prepared to give my wife an injection when she needs it. Can you show me how to do it? And so there are risks that we have traditionally held as those that are essential for professionals to own, which I think we are getting better at sharing and we need to do more of. And I think one of the issues in healthcare and end of life in Western society now is that we completely over-investigate and over-treat. And I think that good person-centered holistic support is about recognizing when enough is enough. Really importantly, we need to normalize talking about death, dying, and loss. And I think actually that's begun with COVID, and this is our chance to build on it. And we cannot expect people that we're looking after, we can't expect communities that we want to engage with to do that if we can't do it. And I notice even in my organization, professionals coming in or colleagues, either as volunteers or staff, who don't have a comfort with the language of death, dying and loss initially. And it will certainly inhibit the people that they're trying to connect with. Intergenerational opportunities are a fantastic way of increasing dialogue around end of life. And I have seen some extraordinary stuff on the web where children, because they've been presented with COVID in its entirety, they know something about the virus and its risks. They are so much more engaged in end of life, death, and so on. And we've a lot to do to invest in them so that they don't grow up with the same kind of sense of taboo that many of us have. any kind of language or conversation needs to reflect the breadth and diversity of experience, aspirations and beliefs. That's a whole talk in itself. But I think regardless, these conversations are part of a journey towards an approach to end of life where actually power is much more equally shared between professionals and those that they care for. And if you've been to the doctor yourself, or you've had a hospital appointment and you genuinely don't really understand what's wrong with you, or you don't understand what they're suggesting as the investigation or the treatment, the doctor or whoever the clinician is who's talking to you is in so much more a powerful position than you, and you are so disempowered in response. So part of my ambitions for greater dialogue and conversation is that actually, if people have information, if they understand it, if they have a language, a set of words that they can use, they can assume the kind of power that they should have to talk about their own end of life or somebody close to them. And I don't need to tell you this, but this conversation must start when we're in the middle of life. Rather than its end. You don't plan what pain relief you're going to have in your birth of your child when you're actually in labour. Very often that happens before. Communities have a huge part to play in end of life in the future. And gosh, if we haven't seen anything else in COVID at St Christopher's, we've seen the power of communities. One of the things that we did very early on in the pandemic was to create something called community aid. We needed to do that because we literally didn't have the people power on the ground. People needed shopping done. They needed practical tasks doing. Many people were incredibly isolated, weren't going to see anybody. And we started to work with our communities in quite a different way. And as of this month, we have had, I think it's 600 volunteers that have come forward as part of community aid with St Christopher's. And I think that religious and community members are really part of the team that can start to change societal experience, ambitions, preparation for end of life. And my own experience of working closely with communities is that they can often take responsibility for shaping our professional services. They can connect with people that we have previously as professionals not been able to engage with community leaders, and I'm including people like yourselves and other church leaders. They can really support community involvement. And I think perhaps most importantly in COVID, you see a unique contribution of communities to good endings around social connectivity and contribution to society. That simply isn't something that professionals can bring to the table. Collaboration and reciprocity, I probably don't need to tell you much about it, but there is so much fragmentation, so little continuity of care, an experience of continuity of care. And this will only happen if people work better together. That might be inside the organization, it might be within the team, it might be much broader around your organization and the system, or your organization and the communities in which it's part. But it's key to reducing inequalities and a more holistic data recently that I was surprised at, unpleasantly surprised at. For people dying at home, only 5% of the time that people are at home, they spend with professionals. So 95% of people's time at home before the end of life is only with their families, their neighbours, or with nobody. So if we want to have a presence around the clock for people, it's not going to sit entirely with professionals. Digital technology, it's moved on so much in the year. And we are using technology in ways that we never have done to connect patients and families and carers to professionals, to promote self-care, to enable people to get access to the kind of services that they need urgently. I've just reviewed some applications for funding for innovative responses to bereavement arising from COVID. And there was one that I was really struck by, where you can go on in your own language and using AI, the computer can interpret what your bereavement need is likely to be, and give you at least 3 or 4 people in your area that you can connect to seek further help. That's so much better than waiting to see your GP, then being referred to IAPT or to a psychology service, and then getting referred to a bereavement service. And technology has really supported social connectivity through Skype and so on, and shared learning opportunities. And what's important for us is that actually this action needs to happen at every level. So it needs to happen for us. We need to embrace it as individuals. Our organizations need to embrace it. The places of which we're a part need to engage in this, and it has to be a national initiative. And there are sort of 5 areas that I'm working with Nesta and with Marie Curie on. And I just raised these so that you can have a look at them. They are around addressing inequalities, really building on the renewed community spirit, looking at how we generate collaboration and trust, and how we increase confidence using digital tools. And the good news in all of this, because these look like pretty big pieces of work, is that there really is energy to grasp the opportunity to do things differently and to work at a whole variety of levels in the system. So let's move on in my last few moments just to talk about what this means for spiritual care. And I suppose I'm interested to ask you, when you go in your groups, to have a little think about some of these questions. I don't know the answers. I wouldn't dream of trying to give them to you. But what are the new opportunities to identify and respond to spiritual pain and distress for people that face the end of life, and for many post-COVID, multiple bereavements? And what role now for community leaders, for people in your positions, to redress long-term disconnection between individuals and their networks and their communities of importance? And that's one of the roles that I've seen happening in my own church, for people who have probably been disconnected from society for quite a while. What opportunities exist for greater connection between community-based spiritual leaders and their local hospitals? I don't know whether any others of you did, but I chimed into a lecture that the Bishop of London was giving a number of, probably about a month ago, talking about mental health, COVID and the church. And she was making a point about how depleted the health system was of the richness of religious life, people who have confidence around existential crisis, and so on. She didn't say that she had thought about drawing all her clergy into the healthcare system, but that's certainly what I would have done if I was in her position. And I think there is something for all of you about kickstarting and helping organizations and people like me to see the new opportunities with a spiritual stance. Here's just a couple of quotes as I finish about some of the shifts that have happened for people in the community who joined our community aid program. One of our compassionate neighbours, that's people that are trained to connect with somebody who is pretty isolated and who's looking for a friend in the community. One of them was actually present in the house when my community member died. And so I was able to support her daughter and help her sort her stuff out. And of course, that is an experience of death that most people never have. Somebody else talked about having much greater insight into my community members' life and their background. It's been good fun. Somebody else talked about the fact that they were able to understand their own experience of grief through witnessing somebody else's. And there were so many pieces of feedback about the sense of purpose and well-being through being part of reciprocal live relationships. And we have a real opportunity to build that on that now. So just final thoughts. It would be easy now after such a challenging time to want to rest a while. But if we don't take an opportunity to build on the disruption of the last 15 months, we will not get that chance for a long time now, I don't think. Most organizations, most systems are pretty unclear about the way forward, and this is your time to help influence and guide us with an attention to person-centered and holistic approaches to care. And we've got evidence of new players, partnerships, appetite for a different society, and early shoots of change. And so I urge you not to be complacent, but to use the time. And you know, I love this. Picture on the right-hand side from Involve around the different ways in which we all participate. So back to which hats you're wearing. You know, it might be about you as an individual chaplain or a practitioner. It might be about the part that you play in your communities, your religious communities, or it might be the part that you play as a citizen in helping to shape the future. There are lots of ways that you can work with us on this. I'm not going to talk about this because Andrew and Mike are around. Find out more from them if you'd like to know more. Thank you very much.